Miles Davis walked into a diner in Memphis, Tennessee, at 6 in the evening on a Tuesday in August 1955, and he didn't leave until midnight. Not because the food was good, not because he was enjoying himself, but because a white man told him he couldn't be there, and Miles Davis decided that on this particular day, in this particular diner, that answer wasn't good enough anymore. The sign on the door said wheats, only, let's, only, mice. We reserve the right to refuse service. Miles had seen 1,000 signs like it. Every musician who toured the South in 1955, you learned which places would serve you, which had a back entrance for colored customers, and which you just avoided. It was part of the exhausting daily calculation of being black in America. But something was different that night. Maybe it was because Miles had just played to a sold-out white audience who'd given him 3 standing ovations. Maybe he was tired of being treated like royalty on stage and like garbage everywhere else. Or maybe he just decided he was done accepting unacceptable things. His band wanted to stop for food after the show. They'd been on the road for 6 weeks, eating cold sandwiches, grabbing whatever they could from the few places that would serve them. Miles walked in first, wearing an expensive dark blue suit. Behind him were 4 musicians from his band, all dressed sharp, all carrying that confidence that comes from being excellent at something and knowing it. The diner wasn't fancy. Red vinyl booths, checkered floor, counter with stools, smell of coffee and fried food. About a dozen white customers stopped mid-conversation when Miles and his band walked in. The owner, a heavy-set man in his 50s with thinning hair and an apron that might have been white that morning, came out from behind the counter. His face went from confused to angry in about 2 seconds. "Can't you read?" he said, pointing at the door. "Sign says whites only." Miles looked at him for a long moment. Then he walked to the counter and sat down on one of the spinning stools. "I can read," Miles said. "I'm a genius, actually, but I'm also hungry. I'd like a hamburger and a Coke." The owner's face turned red. "I just told you, we don't serve your kind here. You need to leave now." Miles didn't move. He adjusted his position on the stool slightly, getting comfortable. "I'm not breaking any law. I'm a paying customer. I'm sitting at your counter, waiting to be served. I can wait as long as it takes." Behind him, his band members shifted nervously. This wasn't the plan. The plan was to get food and get back to the hotel. Nobody had signed up for a confrontation. But Miles wasn't moving, and they weren't going to leave him there alone. "I'm calling the police," the owner said. "Go ahead," Miles replied. His voice was calm, almost bored. "Call them. Tell them a man walked into your restaurant and sat down. Let's see what law you think I'm breaking." The owner didn't call the police. Not yet, because he knew, and Miles knew, that the law was changing. The Supreme Court had ruled on Brown v. Board of Education just a year earlier. The country was shifting, slowly, painfully, but shifting, and a black man sitting at a lunch counter wasn't technically illegal, even if it violated every unwritten rule of the segregated South. So instead, the owner just stood there, fuming, and Miles just sat there, waiting. The other customers didn't know what to do. Some left immediately, throwing money on tables, avoiding eye contact. Others stayed, but stopped eating, watching. After 20 minutes, one of Miles's band members whispered, "Miles, man, this isn't worth it. Let's just go." Miles didn't turn around. There's always other places. That's the problem. "Tonight, I'm eating here." An hour passed. The owner kept muttering threats about police, about getting Miles arrested, but he didn't actually call. because he knew that calling police on a well-dressed musician quietly sitting at a counter would make him look exactly like what he was. Miles sat there, perfectly still, perfectly calm. He didn't pull out a book, didn't start conversations, just sat. His presence alone was the protest. Around 7:30, something interesting happened. A young white couple came in, saw Miles and the tension, and immediately understood. They sat 2 stools away from Miles. "We'd like to order," the husband said. The owner rushed over. "Of course, what can I get you?" "Nothing, until you serve these gentlemen first. They were here before us." The owner's face went purple. "You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Either you serve them or we leave and tell everyone we know why." They sat there in solidarity with Miles. By 8 p.m., 3 more white customers had done the same. The diner was half full of people not eating, just sitting in support of Miles's right to be served. The owner was losing his mind. Every person sitting at a counter or in a booth who wasn't eating was costing him money. The dinner rush, his most profitable times, was being completely destroyed by this protest. He couldn't figure out how to end. "This is ridiculous," he finally shouted. "You're all ridiculous. It's just a hamburger." Miles spoke, for the first time in over 2 hours. "You're right, it is just a hamburger. So why don't you make one?" "Because I don't serve," the owner started, then stopped himself. He'd been about to say it out loud, in front of all these witnesses, about to admit exactly what this was about. Miles tilted his head slightly. "Don't serve what? Hungry people? Paying customers? Americans?" He paused. "Or just black ones?" The silence in that diner was so heavy, you could feel it pressing down. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The owner looked around at his restaurant, at the empty tables where customers should be eating, at the full seats where people were staging a silent revolt, at the money he was losing with every passing minute. And you could see it on his face, the calculation, the slow, painful math of hatred versus profit, principle versus practicality. At 9 p.m., he tried a different approach. He walked over to Miles, his voice lower now, almost pleading. "Look, I'll make you some food to go on the house. You can take it and eat wherever you want, but you can't eat here. People won't understand. This is a white establishment. It's just how things are." Miles looked at him. Really looked at him. "How things are isn't how things have to stay. Make me a hamburger. I'll eat it at this counter, like a human being. I could lose customers over this, regular customers, then lose them," Miles said simply, "and gain new ones, ones who see me as human." By 10 p.m., the owner was desperate. The evening was completely shot. He'd made almost no money. Half the people in his diner weren't eating. The other half had left in disgust. Though whether they were disgusted with him or with Miles, it was hard to say. A couple of the supporters had started talking to Miles, asking about his music, where he was playing next. He was gracious, answered their questions, signed autographs on napkins, turned the whole thing into an impromptu meet and greet. Right there at the counter he wasn't supposed to be sitting at. At 11 p.m., a police officer finally showed up. Someone had called, possibly one of the customers who'd left. The officer walked in, sized up the situation, and you could see him trying to figure out what law was actually being broken here. He talked to the owner in the corner for a few minutes. The owner was gesturing wildly, clearly upset. The officer kept shaking his head. Finally, the officer walked over to Miles. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to..." "To what?" Miles interrupted. "To leave a restaurant where I'm sitting quietly, bothering nobody, just waiting to be served." "What law am I breaking, officer?" The officer looked at Miles, looked at the white supporters sitting nearby, looked at his notepad where he was supposed to write down whatever charge he was planning to make. He closed the notepad. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "But I know this is going to end badly if it keeps going." "Then tell him to serve me," Miles said, gesturing to the owner. "That ends it. I eat, I pay, I leave. Everyone's happy." The officer looked at the owner. The owner looked at the floor. By 11:30, the owner was defeated. You could see it in his posture, in his face. He'd lost this fight, and he knew it. His only question now was how to surrender without admitting surrender. He walked to the kitchen. You could hear pots and pans clanging around. 5 minutes later, he came out with a hamburger and a Coke. He set them in front of Miles, not gently, but he set them down. Miles looked at the food for a moment. Then up at the owner. "Thank you," he said. Just that. Nothing sarcastic. Nothing angry. Just thank you. He ate slowly, savoring every bite. The people who'd been sitting in solidarity started ordering too. The diner filled with the normal sounds of eating, of silverware on plates, of coffee cups being refilled, like it had just been waiting for this moment to exhale. When Miles finished, he pulled out his wallet, left payment for his meal, plus a generous tip. He stood up, straightened his suit, and looked at the owner one more time. "The sign on your door is a lie," Miles said quietly. "You do serve people like me. You just did. The question now is whether you'll keep doing it." Miles and his band walked out. The young couple who'd sat in solidarity followed them outside. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," the woman said. Miles shook his head. "It was just sitting. Sitting shouldn't be brave. That's the problem." 20 years later, in 1975, Miles was playing a show in Memphis. After the concert, a young man in his late 20s came backstage. He was well-dressed, earnest, carrying a manila envelope. "Mr. Davis, I don't know if you remember, but in 1955, you sat in my father's diner for 6 hours until he served you." Miles studied the young man's face. "I remember the diner. What happened to your father?" "He's dead now. Heart attack 3 years ago. But before he died, he wanted me to give you this." The young man held out the envelope. Inside was a photograph, that White's only sign, the one that had been on the diner door. Behind it was a handwritten letter. "Mr. Davis," the letter read, "I took this sign down the morning after you came to my restaurant, and I never put it back up. I'd like to say it was because you taught me something about dignity and humanity. And maybe you did, but honestly, the first few months, I kept it down because I was afraid. Afraid you'd come back with reporters. Afraid of protests. Afraid of losing business. But then, something happened. My son, the boy who's delivering this letter, started asking questions. Why had the sign been there? Why did I take it down? What had I been afraid of?" I couldn't give him good answers. And in trying to explain myself to a child, I heard how hollow my reasoning was, how much I'd based my entire worldview on fear and tradition instead of thought. My diner did lose some customers, the ones who wanted that sign to stay up, but I gained new ones, black families who'd never felt welcome before, white families who were relieved they didn't have to explain to their children why some people weren't allowed. And my son grew up in a diner where everyone was welcome. He's going to college now. Going to be a lawyer, he says. Civil rights law, because he wants to help people like you never have to sit and wait 6 hours just to be served a hamburger. I never got to thank you for sitting in my diner that night, for showing me, through your quiet dignity, what hatred looks like from the outside, for making me choose between my wallet and my conscience, and then showing me they didn't have to be in conflict. You didn't change my heart that night, but you changed my behavior, and eventually, behavior changes the heart. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand. Thank you for being patient enough to teach me. Respectfully, Carl Henderson. Miles stood there holding the letter. For a long time, the young man, Carl Henderson's son, waited. Your father became a lawyer? Miles finally asked. I'm in my second year at Yale Law, the young man confirmed. Civil rights focus. Because my dad always said the most powerful thing he ever witnessed was a man who fought for his dignity without raising his fists, just by refusing to accept less than he deserved. Miles folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope along with the sign. Keep this, he said, handing it back. It's your family's history, your father's growth. That's worth remembering. He wanted you to have it. Said it belonged to you, that you'd earned it. Miles shook his head. I didn't sit in that diner to earn anything. I sat there because I was tired of standing outside. But tell you what, when you pass the bar, when you're a civil rights attorney, when you win your first case defending somebody's right to be treated like a human being, you take that sign and you hang it in your office, as a reminder of what you're fighting against, and what your father fought to become. The young man's eyes filled with tears. They shook hands. Miles went back to his dressing room. The sign hangs today in a civil rights museum in Memphis. Next to it, a plaque tells the story of the night. Miles Davis sat at a counter for 6 hours, not because he wanted to be a hero, but because he wanted a hamburger. And about the man who learned slowly and painfully that the choice between profit and principle isn't really a choice at all. Sometimes change doesn't come from dramatic speeches or violent protests. Sometimes it comes from one person sitting quietly, refusing to move until the world treats them the way they deserve to be treated. And sometimes that's all it takes. If this story of quiet dignity and hard-won change moved you, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear about the courage it takes to simply sit down and refuse to stand up for injustice. Drop a comment telling us about a time you witnessed someone standing up for what's right, even when it wasn't easy. And ring that notification bell for more stories about the moments that changed the world, one meal, one conversation, one act of quiet defiance at a time.